connected to some of the Imams. The inspiration, or a great deal of the inspiration, from their contacts with the Imams. But the beginning of the formation of the organized communities, recognized as schools, practices that lead to the greater recognition of the divine presence within all of us. They coincided with the last stages of the Imams and before the Haider of Imam Naqvi. So while some of the early members of these schools may have interacted with the Imams, in particular one Ma'ruf al-Karhi, Shaykh Ma'ruf al-Karhi, who is of Imam Haider. The association between the two is well known, has been established over time, and it has been said and confirmed that Ma'ruf al-Karhi, Shaykh Ma'ruf al-Karhi, who was based in Baghdad, and around him a group of disciples formed, was connected with the Imam Haider. Ma'ruf al-Karhi was a contemporary of another famous early candidate for leadership of these schools of Tasawwuf. He was an associate of a person called Sahel ibn Abdullah, who came from the southernmost parts of Iran, Tusla, which is around the Ahwaz. Ma'ruf al-Karhi, who found himself in Baghdad and Imam Haider, and then became a teacher in his own right, Sahel ibn Abdullah, and other groups of teachers and Gnostics who gravitated towards Baghdad. We're now talking about the beginning of the 10th century, somewhere in the period between 880 AD to around 950 AD. Other people, other teachers naturally gravitated towards Baghdad because it was a center for the empire, it was a center of learning. There were already great sheikhs there, and more intensely with those with Yahya ibn Ma'ad, who migrated to Baghdad, to Khurasan. Baghdad became a magnet for a large number of these shuyukh who arose at various places in the empire. So they were not really concentrated around the Arabic-speaking parts only. Some came, most of them came in fact from Iran. Some came from even further afield, if you think of Khurasan as not being part of Iran as such, but as being the whole northeast corner of what was then the Muslim, beyond the rivers, what is now present-day Afghanistan, Pakistan, places like Moru, centers in the northeastern part of the Muslim world, from which great walis emerged. And these people gravitated naturally towards Baghdad. Some of them stayed in their own environment and did not move. Their sayings were known, and because of the spread of more effective communication, there was correspondence and dialogue between them and some of the great teachers found in the main. If we think of Baghdad in the early days of the Abbasid Empire, the days of the Khalifa Harun al-Rashid and the Amin al-Ma'mun, it became a true center, in the sense that it became the focal point around which great men of knowledge, particularly of the inner part, gravitated. And parallel to the formation of the outer schools of theology, of Kalam, the outer schools of fiqh, jurisprudence, they emerged in a more discrete manner, schools built around these great masters. So we can talk about something called the Baghdad School of Tasawwuf. And I'll explain the importance of that, inshallah, because certain and very important practices, particularly nurturing certain faculties and recognizing certain states, emerged in a formalized way as a result of the practices of these shuyukh and their disciples. Another great center, not so focused along a major metropolitan area, but focused along one or two great walis formed in Khurasan, and in particular a person by the name of Bistan. These emphasized different paths to the divine presence. They emphasized different means and gave different primacy, different weightings to constituted to experience. And although in many ways they complemented each other, in some ways and in important ways they parted. And these two mashrabs, as you say in Arabic, these two sources formed within themselves what later came to be known as the or sahu, as you say in Arabic, and the Sufis who emphasize intoxication. I don't want to be again mechanical about this, because I'm sure all these great walis in the early times were not mechanical. They did not think of these things in terms of how it would appear in written form, how it should be ordered and categorized and classified. They transmitted their experiences, sometimes in written form, mostly in oral form those days, in the way that they themselves experienced it. And their own recognition of the importance and the primacy of their path towards the station forward is the one that defines how they transmitted it to others. These particular mashrabs had a certain type of following. The more those who were inclined towards, or those who came from cultural and civilizational backgrounds that were primarily urban, that were primarily literature-oriented, that were primarily motivated by the vision of beauty and the aesthetics of beauty, tended to gel then and even now in what is known as the Khurasani school, that is the school of Bastami that emphasized intoxication. I'll discuss what this really means, both in terminological. The school of Khurasan, whose leader exposed, as it were, was Bayezid Bastami, is the school that favors the direct experience, the direct interaction and interrelationship with the divine love, with the mahabba, with the divine mercy, that emphasizes that the experience of being within the proximity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala erases and obliterates all characters, all faculties within a person, within the true Gnostic. And what is left is the intoxication of the Gnostic with simply the sight and the visage of the absolute power and majesty and beauty of all else, including his own inner qualities, are subservient to this. So he becomes infatuated, he becomes absorbed, he becomes completely apart from all existential constraints. This is the school of Bastami. Bastami himself was a person who reached great heights of inner knowledge and great heights of experience. But in his divine intoxication, he ordered in many of his actions what could be construed and what later is used against those who choose the path. That is, actions that were borderline in terms of their acceptability in the art of Sharia, and utterances and sayings that, when taken out of context, become seen as being cryptical and even in some cases blasphemous. So this school, this entire school, which has as its heartland then Iran, and probably now the Sufi tariqas in India and Pakistan especially, and to a lesser extent, the influence and the experiences and sayings of this time became part of their own lexicon, part of their own. And the school of Baghdad, as it crystallized around the great Abu Qasim Junaid. Abu Qasim Junaid is a seminal figure in all of the Sufi tariqas, and is a seminal figure to all attempts to understand the inner part of Islam, whether it's in the form of tariqas or whether it's in the form of different mechanisms and manners. Abu Qasim Junaid was the nephew of Sa'il ibn Abdullah. He was born in Baghdad, although some people say he was born in Nahawand in Iran and then came very early, at a very early age to Baghdad. And he was, as his teachers, he came obviously under the wings of his uncle. On near Ahwaz, Tusta. Sayyid ibn Abdullah is mainly known to us more in what he taught others rather than what he left behind in the form of books or writings. And in many ways he's a Socratic figure, in the sense that his influence on his particular Abu Qasim Junaid is extremely important, and it is the same association that Socrates had with Plato, although Socrates left no. His personality loomed very large in the formation of all the Sayyid ibn Abdullah had a very important influence on his nephew Qasim Junaid, and he can be seen. Another person who was in Baghdad and played a part in the formation of Qasim Junaid was the hence he's known as the two sectors. The third person who played a part in the formation of Abu Qasim Junaid is a man called Al-Harith Muhasibi, the crystallizing of the notion of the need for sobriety. I'll explain that inshallah later. Came to be a central point in the saying the sobriety is something that is understood, that can only be understood by those who have along the various stages of inner development. But the conduct of the person who has reached high levels of inner knowledge and enlightenment, as it relates to the outside world, is also governed by a sense of precaution, by a sense of being even secret, or being very discreet in the knowledge that they have attained, so that the knowledge that they have and the state that they have does not disrupt the outer harmony of society. And this interaction of Sufis with society in the form of that the necessity to maintain a sense of order, a sense of decorum, a sense of balance, the necessity of being careful how one describes one's states, the necessity of abiding strictly, both in action, in the tongue, and by the heart, by the ordinances of the outer law. This is what is known as the outer sobriety by the writings of the Qasim Junaid. He himself was an important theologian, and he was one of the first people to try to formalize the also established within the terms of tasawwuf the difference between iman, which is faith, and ma'rifah, which is knowledge, and how each other and how they vary from each other, and how each one has its own degree. He unfortunately was hounded by Ahmad ibn Hanbal, even though he's a very strict and very correct person in his outer behavior, but he set himself off basically from all of it. He also gave Junaid and subsequent Sufis the concern not only with moral issues but concern with practical action. So if we talk about Junaid as bringing together these various strands and articulating them in a whole, articulating them in a form that we now understand to be the true Sufi's concern with moral behavior, with outer behavior, the true Sufi's concern with discussion and decorum, the true Sufi's concern with balance and order in society, we can say that it came from Sayyid ibn Abdullah on one side, but above all Muhasibi. We now come to Junaid, who is the central as Sayyid al-Hukama wal-Arifin in Ahl Asr. That is, he was the of those of knowledge and wisdom of his age. As to him, the giving mysticism, that is inner knowledge, its Islamic form. That is, he Islamicized in many ways the forms in which, and the language, and the context in which mysticism, be it tasawwuf, as we understand it, or arfan, gnostic, into the Islamic community, rather than being either a strange entity that was somehow grafted, which is what most Orientalists have thought, at least not now, but at least have thought in the 19th century, some Muslim like it. And neither is it a form of practice that is unique to few oddballs. He basically Islamicized it and gave it the forms that we now understand, and gave it the language that we now understand. He was very careful also in terms of his interaction and interrelationship with the outer, and especially with those in power and authority. He kept his distance from them, but he did not attack them, neither did he confront them, the way that some of the Khorasani Sufis, or those who, what we call now the intoxicated Sufis, did. According to the or stories that we hear of him, he never had more than 20 people at any point. The inner secrets of this. This is the practice that you cannot divulge your secrets of the inner way, of the inner path. The adepts who are able to absorb and who are able to reflect. You cannot go and give a lecture. You have the kind of response that is expected from those who come to you with a true and open heart. You will see that some of his actions are comparable to the teachings of the Imam. For example, his advocacy of precaution or taqiyya. Again, it is taqiyya or precaution not in the sense of being in realities, but being careful in who you discuss issues that cannot be understood except by those with the right orientation and the right taste. It establishes also, inshallah, that about what we are doing, what we are saying, and what we are practicing in a very light-hearted way, that it can only be discussed with those who have the right initiation. Otherwise, we will be misunderstood. And the misunderstanding of those of us, inshallah, who are seeking inner knowledge is there are volumes in history, and volumes in history that specify examples and states where a lot of people have suffered as a result of their inability to discriminate and to differentiate between whom they associate and those with whom they discuss these things. And this unfortunately happened in the days of Junaid. This was the beginning of the first persecutions, if you want to call them that, of the Sufis. The theologian of the outer, Ali, by the name of Haider and Qamar Naqvi, who brought the first case against the Sufis. The case to the then Khalifa al-Muwaffaq. Because a lot of the disciples of Junaid and a lot of unrestrained Sufis who got their initiations from the Khorasani school and migrated to Baghdad, started bandying about terms like Ishq al-Ilahi, divine love. Now, that expression itself, to the uninitiated, is at the least scandalous. In other ways, it's blasphemous, and can, because of its possible physicality, can lead to all kinds of misinterpretations and brought the case against this whole community that we call them the Sufis. This was the first case where an entire community was accused, and then he picked out their leaders, some of whom were associates or friends or even shuyukh in their own right, friends and associates of Junaid and shuyukh in their own right. For example, Nuri, a sheikh and a great wali, who was dragged in front of the qadi by the judge by the actions of this one Ghulam al-Khalid, who of one of the then dominant schools of fiqh, the Zahiri school. Fortunately, the Khalifa al-Muwaffaq was a military man, and he was more concerned with matters of people were really not affected. So the whole case was dismissed. But it left a residual fear, and it left a residual distrust on the part of the great Shaykh of how to deal with it. Another feature came about, which is the only from authority and power on one hand, but also the distancing from the ulama or the theologians of the outside. They also, because of what this person did, Ghulam al-Khalid, in charges and whipping up popular opinion, it also left a sense of the public as a whole did not become too a residual dislike, even then, as a result of the attempt by some of those theologians to create a public or popular backlash against it. Popular dislike has been used over time until maybe 200 or 300 years later, after the great synthesis of Hamid al-Ghazali, was used frequently to whip up sentiment against those who may have been too successful in generating disciples. And as a result of this also, as a result of this persecution, harassment, this famous court case against this group of Sufi Bashir, the popular sentiment that these people were somehow at the borderline of Islam, Junaid began a determined effort to the public, aware in his writings of the anchoring of the entire way, the entire path of inner knowledge in the Sunnah of the on prophetic hadith, the drawings on specific ayahs in the Quran to justify and to explain and to affirm the correctness of the way. It also gave us the first attempts, and they were, in my mind, they were attempts that basically defined the whole course, future course of the anchoring of all the actions and precepts of the path in the Sunnah on one hand. And the group, as I said, included great shuyukh such as Nuri, who's Ibn Ata al-Admi, and the well-known Junaid defined tasawwuf as, in very simple terms, as covering the attempt by the adept, the desire by the adept to cover the distance between man and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Process of covering that is the true purpose and the true permanence of this path. We are not in this path in order to understand that there is a distance and to try to cover the distance within our means, within the powers and capacity that we have. Then what we are doing is not what we say we are doing. So defining that tasawwuf and inner knowledge in its broader terms, not only in its Sufi terms, but in its broader terms, is the path that leads towards reducing the distance, increasing the proximity between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on one side and created beings on the other, with the absolute knowledge that there is no ability and no capability even at the highest levels of inner enlightenment, of being absorbed so that one becomes united, that this is a fallacious and an impossible notion. That brings us to his other great contribution, which is the contribution of Tawheed, the unicity of actions at the heart of Tasawwuf. And his doctrine of Tawheed, the doctrine of Junaid as it relates to Tawheed, is basically the defining doctrine for all Sufi ways. And I would add, in spite of the enormous expansions and broadening of the horizons that were brought to the understanding of Tawheed by the great Ibn Arabi. So the core, the first space, the first definition of what Tawheed means in terms of the person on the path was established by Junaid. He also brought us the other main doctrine of Tasawwuf, which is the doctrine of Fana and Baqa, and I'll explain that later inshallah. He defines a person in Tawheed as being, or he defines Tawheed as being a reality in which the traces, athar, disappear, and the signs fade away. And Allah is as He always was. He defines Tawheed as being the separation. This is extremely important and critical because many people believe that the desire of all of us is to somehow be reincarnated in Allah and become, or the other way around, which is hulul. These are two doctrines or two ideas which are completely denounced by those who are true to the path and true to the message of the great ways. Separation, Tawheed, is a separation of the eternal, the qadim, from that which originated in time. Ifrad al-qadim المحدد. You cannot consider that the permanent, the eternal, the absolute is possible in the same plane of existence as the created, as the entity created in time. You can try to bring that created in time towards knowledge of that, towards understanding of that, and towards recognition of that. But the two, the separation, will always be there within Tawheed. So Tawheed is this duality that understands the impossibility of the two becoming one, but the recognition that one is all. That there are four categories of Tawheed. For ordinary people, for the ordinary believer, the mu'min, the person who abides by the injunction of the Sharia, Tawheed is to assert the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, discarding all associates, likenesses, opposites, or companions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is, you discard all notions of shirk. But the common person who is in Tawheed maintains hopes and fears in forces other than Allah. And his Tawheed is acceptable because he asserts that there is a unity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the Tawheed of most people. That is those who affirm in the tongue and in their, not in it, but in their tongue at least, that and you cannot like it, but still have hopes and fears regarding other things. Their hopes and fears regarding their sustenance, their hopes and fears regarding their future, their income, their families, etc. They do not put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the heart of their understanding of hope and fear, raja and hope. Form of Tawheed is the Tawheed of those who act according to the precepts of the deen also, who unify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their tongue, who unify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their thought, do not associate him with other likenesses, and whose public acts reflect that. Their Tawheed is accepted because it is the Tawheed of the tongue, the acceptance of the unicity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at the same time there is a public element to it. There's an element of acting out this in terms of relationships with other people and in society as a whole. The third kind of Tawheed is that affirms the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that combines it with public acts of recognition of Allah's unicity, but maintains no other hopes and fears except in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That his entire hopes, for whatever it may be, for sustenance, for reward, for return, for whatever, and his fears of whatever may come, are anchored only in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in created entities. Last one, the last form of Tawheed, and we're not talking about maybe 200 years before Ibn Arabi or Sahrawardi elaborated all of this. And so you can see the genius, the spiritual genius of the Qasim of a man or a woman in true Tawheed, where there is no shabah, where there is no individuation between the person and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That person is the person who is in absolute Tawheed. And from that person, which is the fourth category of Tawheed, the recognition of that person, of the primal state of man, and the purpose of the tasawwuf of Al-Qasim and Junaid, in contrast to the tasawwuf of Khurasan. As I said, these are two major mighty rivers from which other rivers and streams evolve. Is that the tasawwuf of Al-Qasim and Junaid is the desire of the person of inner knowledge to go back to the state of primal being, state where there is in existence only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we were only in existence in as much as our souls recognize the sole existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which means going back to the original mithaq, the original covenant of Alasta bi Rabbikum. And this the mithaq or the covenant in the doctrine of Junaid is the primary purpose and the end goal for all those who pass through various stages of inner jihad, of inner struggle towards reaching that final blueprint. The Khurasani school we'll talk about later, inshallah, when we discuss the martyrdom or the execution of Hallaj. It says these spirits knew of Allah's presence when they made their covenant without knowing their own individuation. That is, they could affirm the rububiyyah, the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, without them knowing that they existed as entities. And it is this state of recognizing the lordship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, erasing and effacing the existence or the knowledge or the secondary existence that we have, is the purpose of speakers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to Junaid, and this became an important element in most of the later tariqas. As you progress along the path of Tawheed towards this original covenant, that i.e. the elimination or the effacement of the knowledge of self as being in existence, that the person is in a form of secondary existence, originating his entire wujud, his entire being, is as a result of another absolute being. This passes through the stage of what he calls fana, which is obliteration or annihilation. And again, fana has been used or misused by both those who claim they are Sufi or claim they are on the path, and by those who tend to use that word to hurl back at them and accuse them of being polytheists or being pantheists or being those who claim that they have Allah, astaghfirullah, incarnated. Or obliteration, according to Junaid, is the obliteration of, first stage of it is to obliterate all personal factors behind your motives in your actions of devotion. And to go whenever your nafs, whenever your self desires something intensely, you go to its opposite. And this again became, as we all know, an important doctrine of educating ourselves, of ta'weed. That is, you control your desires, you control the excesses, you control the overflow of your demands. In order for you to, not for their sake, in and of themselves that's good, as it relates to others, but you control them in order to allow you to move one rung up towards knowledge. You obliterate or you annihilate the pleasure that you get from trying to be good, from trying to be in a state of, or trying to reward yourself that you're moving towards fana. The pleasure that we get, that is what is called the wiya, the pleasure of the self in basically patting itself on the back. Look how I'm moving along. That must be obliterated. Obliteration is to obliterate your knowledge that you have been obliterated. Once you reach there, once you have annihilated, and this is, we're talking about years or lifetimes or never, but this is the struggle, these are the stages through which the struggle passes. You reach a point where you then have to recognize that obliteration in and of itself is only the reverse side of the coin of being permanently existing as a result of Allah's mercy, which is what is known. Once you reach that stage, according to the Prophet Junaid, you then have two choices. You can either be in such a state of intense desire to be within the Hadra of Allah, within the divine presence. What you do what the Prophet did, having gone in his Isra and Mi'raj to the divine presence, he didn't stay there. He came back. And that is to come back to to society, to man, and conduct and interact with people, but this time with the light of being near the divine reality, and acting in a way that will guard that secret that you have. This is not to be displayed to everyone. You have reached there, you've come back, now it is your responsibility to interact and deal with people, to deal with society, with the knowledge that. And it is this return back, which is what we call the state of sobriety, this whole process, whereby the adept or the seeker chooses as a part of Allah's to return back and to interact and to deal with people rather than to stay in a state of intoxication. This is what differentiates the school of Baghdad, which later became the dominant feature of all the great tariqas, particularly the Qadriya, even the Shadli, not so organized except in the Indo is what describes the passage of the two Sufis. So all those people who accuse Sufis of being responsible for the decay of the Muslim world and they're contemplating, the journey doesn't end by reaching that stage, but his journey really begins after he comes back. And again, we know also in our path on this Haider that we use this Mecca-Medina paradigm. That is, Mecca is where Prophet ﷺ reached knowledge and gnosis and interact and deal. And since our Prophet and guide and belief is the Prophet ﷺ, our example, there's a poem that he wrote, which I have tried to translate, and inshallah it comes out, about the return of the seeker back to society, back to his community, where he assumes his own individuality, but this time it's charged with knowledge. He returns to the community, but keeps a secret. I have realized that which is within me, and my tongue has conversed with you in secret. And we are united in one respect, but we are separated in another. Though God has hidden you from the glances of my eye, ecstasy has made you near to my inmost parts. And this is the state of all true Arabs, of being near and immeasurably far, the state of being within but outside. And the Arab comes back, the true Arab comes back, the true knower comes back. The self seeks the beauty and majesty which it has experienced, and it seeks it, tries to find it, also in the outer science of Allah's beauty and majesty. And it finds it in beautiful vistas, in gardens, in heights and mountains, and this sighing or this yearning is an important element in all classical poetry, particularly classical Persian poetry. That is the yearning for the signs of beauty and majesty, gardens, streams, water, geometrically perfect symbols. These all became part and parcel of what we now know as Islamic art, of the true seeker having glanced the divine reality. In the final analysis, when he comes back, according to all those Arabs who have come back, and those whom I consider to be Arabs, exhibit that. They have no cares or worries. They're in absolute liberty. So the state of sahwa or sobriety is the state which we all aspire to, and it was first formulated and regularized in the way that we understand it by Junaid, who denounces, and he does denounce it, one of his recital, which I know, one of his, but the sobriety is necessary because you cannot understand or reach this stage unless you are in complete control of your faculties. You cannot become a muhaqqaq, that is a seeker of truth, while you are insane. You cannot do that. And intoxication, that is the complete absorption in the divine beauty by itself, leads to, once you return back, because you have to deal with people, leads to insanity and leads to abnormal behavior. So, sukr, in the intoxication of the divine visage, cannot be the permanent state of a haraf. It can be only to reach the divine presence in order to be absorbed by it. And that part of that is the destruction of all faculties within a person which are not conducive to that. So what is left in a person are only the non-human, quote-unquote, faculties. The great Hujwiri says, defining the difference between the two in his book, Kashf al-Mahjub. Sukr, that is drunkenness or intoxication, is the playing ground of children, while sahu or sobriety is the battlefield and struggle of men. This is really the tradition from which we all draw our inspiration. These various individuals, the early ascetics, the early zuhad, began to form groups and groupings around sheikhs and important shuyukh, and they became crystallized in the near definitive form before they turned themselves into tariqas. The school of Khurasan gave rise to a person who was of great complexity in modern his passage, his life and his death became basically the defining goalposts, as it were, of the school of intoxication. And Hallaj features enormously in both modern and medieval poetry and literature, and his experiences and his passage and his life and his finding his martyrdom, if you support him, his execution like that if you don't, became one of the defining points of early tasawwuf. And the best insight into Hallaj that I have read is by Qamar in his before he was executed. Somebody asked Hallaj in prison, what is love? And he told him, you will know in 3 days. The first day after he said that, they cut off Hallaj's hands and feet. The second day they strung him off the gallows, and the third day they threw his ashes in the wind. What I was saying is that Hallaj's definition of love is both the absolute absorption in the ishq al-Rabbani, the divine love, as well as the betrayal of that. Both of these are in the same person. Many of the great biographers, early biographers of Islam, like Ibn Nadim, for example, thought of him as a scoundrel and as a crook who just somehow stumbled into tasawwuf, and he continued. The other great early biographer of the Sufis is Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami in Tabaqat al-Sufiyya, where he says about Hussein ibn Mansur al-Hallaj. He says, most of the great shuyukh rejected him and refused to consider him as being a Sufi. Others, and he mentions some of them, that no, he was a man who was in a very high state. Only a few of them considered him muhaqqaq, that is, a true seeker of truth. Book for the great exposition on the life and tragedy of Hallaj is by Massimo. The title, he compared Hallaj's trials and death finally to what he was born in Faris, which is the heartland of Iran, near Shiraz, in 858, which makes him a contemporary of the traveled from Iran to Basra, and from Basra he moved to Baghdad, where he became actually a disciple of Junaid. But finally Junaid warned him that you're talking sometimes in ways that can be misunderstood, and he had Hallaj with him. And when he left for his first pilgrimage, some people were whispering that he was creating some havoc. He started his claims upon his return back from Mecca, and his famous saying, "Ana al-Haq," I am the truth, became basically the slogan of all of those pseudo-Sufis who claim that of the commander in ultimately, if you can reach high stage of knowledge and high stage of experience, you become the truth, which is very dangerous to the doctrine of incarnation, which is rejected in Islam. Various wanderings, as I said, he kept on saying these perplexing utterances and these borderline sayings which can be misunderstood and were misunderstood. But obviously he had with him several followers. And in his last Hajj to Mecca, there were 400 people, according to the historians who went with him. Finally he came back from his third pilgrimage to Mecca. He came back to Baghdad, and he really began to the ulamas, as well as some of the great Sufi sheikhs, both the Sunni orthodoxy as well as the Shia orthodoxy, that he is a very dangerous man in his utterance, and that he was explaining our ways that are inimical to the deen and were conducive to public order or to the public's understanding of what religion was about. He was apprehended and then sentenced to death, but his death sentence was basically held in abeyance for 10 years. Finally, he was put to death in this horrible way, where his hands and feet were cut off and he was hung. And there are many stories about his death. Most of them have somehow filtered into poetry, and his figure, as well as the way he lived and the way he died in particular, became a pivotal element in Persian poetry, in Turkish poetry, in Indian poetry. And his famous saying before he died was, trusted friends, because in my death there is life. That is the in short, the summary of Hallaj's life, but his impact on both future course of Tasawwuf, as well as the culmination of what could be understood as the Khorasani school of intoxication, which had later on other elements of it. He has one book called Kitab al-Tawasim, where there are very, very strong, and I must say a chaste way about divine love and ishq al-Rabbani. But you could see that there is a strain of pantheism, there is a strain of incarnation, and the rightly distanced by what Junaid said, which is to keep this and to warn him that even if he's in a state of high ecstasy, they have reached that state, that the true person, the true Arab, does neither discloses it, nor does he reach states where his utterances are said in public, or utterances are said in front of people who do not understand what he means. But great impact, at least on several Sufi schools, as well as on really the course of a lot of Persian poetry and Turkish poetry, even Arabic poetry. These days there's a famous poet by Abu Habil Bayati, an Iraqi poet. This thing, inshallah, brings us to the end of this chapter in this book, of how the two main currents of Tasawwuf, the school of Baghdad, organized around Junaid, and gave to us the notions and of the Khorasani school, which in its more less exotic form, let's say, is also within the true body of knowledge and insight. And within the circle of permissible conduct, groups could form claiming that they are connected to the great Shaykh Hallaj, who drew his inspiration, so he said, from the Bastami. Ignores the fact that the Bastami keeps on referring that the only true dalil, the only true guide, is Prophet ﷺ. And nowhere do we find in Hallaj this love of the Prophet, which is an absolute sine qua non, it's the absolute essential for all true seekers. I want to maybe mention a few aphorisms and sayings. I'd like to correct a few aphorisms and sayings of these shuyukh that we discussed, just to give you a flavor of what they have said. Bastami says, there is no degree to a Gnostic. When they asked him, what are the degrees of Gnostic? He says, the highest benefit to a Gnostic is to find the object of his knowledge. He also said, I have spent 30 years in inner struggle and found nothing more difficult than the path of knowledge. And were it not for disputes between the ulamas, I would have not strayed from the path. Also, Allah has looked into the hearts of his walis. فمنهم من لم يكن يصلح لحمل المعرفة صفا فشغلهم بالإقبال. Those who could not carry the burden of true knowledge, I have put in their outer rituals. Often, how do the Gnostics gain their knowledge? And he answered, by forgetting what is theirs and remembering only what is Allah's. How did you reach that stage? He says, I knew Allah by Allah, and I knew what is not Allah's by the light of Allah. He has had also, really, apart from Hallaj, I think he's the most important influence that emphasizes the obliteration. Ibn Abdullah says, لا معين إلا الله. There is no helper except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ولا دليل إلا رسول الله. And there is no guide except the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. ولا زاد إلا التقوى ولا عمل إلا الصبر. And there is nothing that increases more than true precaution and fear, and no work greater than patience. Turkey says, إذا أراد الله بعبد خيرا فتح عليه باب العمل. If Allah wanted goodness for him, the door or the path of work, وأغلق عنه باب الجدل, and he closed for him the door of disputation. وإذا أراد الله بعبد شرا أغلق عنه باب العمل وفتح عليه باب الجدل. For example, he would have closed the door of work, good works, and opened the door of disputation. So it says, توكل على الله, rely on Allah, حتى يكون هو معنى ومؤنسة وموضع شكوى. فإن الناس لا ينفعونك ولا يضرونك. Let Allah, rely on Allah, let Him be your true source of help and succor. Because people cannot help you or harm you. How do you exit, they asked Ma'al al-Qadri, how do you exit the love of the dunya from the heart? And he said, through purity of intentions and through good conduct. He also said, المحبة ليس من تعليم الخلق إنما هي من مواهب الحق وفضله. True love is not taught to you by created entities, but it is one of the divine inspirations given to you, one of the divine graces given to you. Ibn Ma'al said, الزاهد صافي الظاهر مختلط الباطن. العارف صافي الباطن مختلط الظاهر. The ascetic has a pure outer form, but his inner state is mixed. The knower, the true Gnostic, his inner form is pure, but his outer is mixed. stay away from three types of people. Those who claim knowledge but who are in their mind is elsewhere. And those Sufis who are ignorant. So even then there were Sufis who claimed their tasawwuf but in reality had a state of ignorance. The ascetic, yes, the ascetic exteriors, outer actions are pure, but his inner state is mixed. The knower, the gnostic, his inner state is pure, but his outer form is mixed. That is, you cannot know. The Zahid is a person whose zuhd is known. That is, the ascetic, his asceticism is known to all. You see him not eating, not drinking, wearing, putting ash on himself and so on. But you don't know his true state. His true state may be that of a person in furqan, in discrimination, or it might not be. It might be just doing that for action. But the Gnostic, what matters is his true state, his inner state, not his outer form. His outer form can be anything. Junaid, I'd like to limit myself, please. One person came to Junaid. He said the Gnostics are those who, once they reach the true state of knowledge, can leave their outer devotions, because they are now amongst the righteous and those in state of taqwa, precaution. Junaid answered, this is the إن هذا قول قوم تكلموا بأسقاطهم. This is the talk of those who call for the dropping of the obligations. And this is وهذه عندي عظيمة, and this is a great, great sin. والذي يسرق ويزني, and the man who steals, or the person who steals and commits adultery, is far better than those who call for the dropping of the outer actions as a result of their claimed knowledge. Because those, the true Arabs, the true knowers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, take their actions from Allah. And it is through their actions that they return to Him also. And if I had stayed 1,000 years in a state of righteousness and A'mal al-Birr, I cannot assume that I'm an Arab unless I commit myself to the ritual devotions, i.e. that you have to be in a state of absolute conformity to the bounds of the Sharia. Otherwise, there's a school of Sufis, for example, I don't want to say anything, but those, especially those who come to the West from the East, and gradually dissolve the connection between knowing and knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the actions required of us by the Sharia. And somehow they distance and divorce themselves. But they still call themselves that because they are in a state of righteousness and awareness. Also, all roads are closed to, all roads of knowledge are closed to entities, except those who follow the traces of the Prophet ﷺ, and those who follow his injunctions and abide stuck to his way. All the roads of goodness are open to them if they follow in the Sunnah of the Prophet. So this school that we talked about, that inshallah we should all be proud that we are in the path of great walis like Junaid, brings us, it never took us away, but it should confirm to us that the sobriety of our path, the need to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and come back and deal with creation and deal with creatures and deal with institutions and deal with society with the eyes of the knower. The requirement is absolute. It is also absolute that we stay within the bounds of the Sharia, and that there is no path that leads to knowledge and that leads to perfection of qualities of character without us taking the
final verdict on that.
No, this is not true.
Is it not true? I've heard that he was
Who's to give a comment? I mean, Hallaj was sentenced, I think, in 922. And Junaid died before that time. And he wouldn't pass judgment on him while he was alive. And he said that he did not say whether he was an Arif or whether he was not, but he had warned him that he should. These are all stories that were added on by those who want to give Hallaj as basically a position in this pamphlet.
Yeah, I think that yeah, in the Allawi.
Well, the Allawi are not. I mean, maybe they have their own insights and things, but what matters also is certain historical reality. Let me just say that. 309 Hijri, and Junaid died 279 Hijri. 30 years between the execution of Hallaj. If you take 10 years from that because he spent it in jail, it is not possible. I'm sorry to the party for the Qawanis, but it's not possible. It's like there are many apocryphal stories that over time become sort of true. Like, for example, Hassan al-Basri was initiated by Imam Ali alayhi salam. It's not possible because he was about 8 years old. These are, I think, are additions or increases that don't really detract from the substance.
Anyway, the
Qawanis are saying...
the Qawanis moved away, they want to set records.
No, I think what the Qawanis are saying is that Al-Junaid was neutral in his judgment, which is true. I mean, he would not make a decision about him, but he was not involved in this trial. He couldn't have been. He died 30 years before. He is obviously a very powerful figure and has become, in some places, a figure of because of the tragedy of the way he died. I don't believe with Ibn Najim that he was a scoundrel. I think he was some kind of awareness and knowledge. But he was not anchored. And so, I mean, Junaid's comments, as recorded by the Qawalis, is probably true. He was not. The story that he went to the gallows dancing in chains, and then all the mob of Baghdad was throwing rocks at him. And then one of his friends, Shibli, threw a rose at him. And he turned to Shibli and said, the rose that you threw at me hurt me more than the rocks that the mob threw. And Shibli's rose, at least in Turkish poetry, is it's a favor or a signal of love that you give to somebody that is not really accepted by that person. It's a form of unrequited recognition. So if Shibli didn't throw his rose, he was supposed to be his friend, you see. A lot of stories about Hallaj, some of them cannot be true. For example, Attar, in his book Mantaq al-Tayr, says at the beginning that he was inspired by the dream of Hallaj. So he used him as his guide, as the hudhud in the story. It was sort of a metaphor for Hallaj. But we can't translate it.
Sorry about the incompatibility, the absolute and time. And then they're all, is this a paradox? You're saying that they're all in Tawheed.
Well, if the paradox is the correct thing. We'll discuss that later, but I'm sure all of us feel that there is a paradox. When we say La ilaha illallah, just the statement of Shahada can imply one thing at one level and imply something else at a different level entirely. So it is what we know, once we know that we are many and one, but the one, it is out of one that the many occur, but they're not the same. This kind of paradox, I think, can only be understood by not by the intellect, but the processes or the practices of inner knowledge that allows us to live in but not of this world, both being yes and no, being basically if you want to use modern physics, the quantum mechanics of spirituality. That is, you're in one state, but not really that state. You're also in another state. You're both a particle and a wave. The mind cannot understand it. So we have to develop this other faculty so that we're at home and at ease with recognizing this constant. The swings of one pendulum, one reality. At a different level, there are many realities. I think Junaid recognized that, but obviously this
is where the obliteration comes in. Is this what he's?
Yes.
Obliteration with and our lives become a total shipwreck. I mean, you're going.
Practical terms, yes. Practical terms, you can only hold. You have certain desires, certain urges. Right? The idea is not to do the opposite for the sake of doing the opposite, but the idea is the practice should be to understand the opposite, to live the opposite, to see where the middle is. I mean, the middle might be the opposite, or it might be what the desire is. But the control of the self is not to destroy it. You cannot destroy the self, you cannot destroy individuation in as much as we exist physically. And that's what Junaid was saying. To destroy the self in a state of fana, and then go around the world proclaiming that, might be something that allows you to articulate, as it were, this overwhelming experience that you've had, or set of experiences that you've had. But it does not detract, it does not eliminate the fact that you are individuated, you exist, and therefore you have to deal with other people. So it's basically a truncated process. And the whole point about what Junaid was saying is that this truncation is stopping at some point and saying, I have arrived, and that's all I want to see. There are some great, for example, Abu Sa'id al-Khair, the great Persian poet, and he's sometime around maybe 150 years after the period you're talking about. One of his famous talks and discourses that if he was the Prophet, and he had gone on with Mi'raj, he would not have come back. The state of being in the divine presence might intoxicate a person to the point where he doesn't want to leave it. So who cares if he goes around looking like a dervish and so on. But also, of course, this can lead to a great deal of trickery and a great deal of tomfoolery at the same time, which is what happens subsequently. What Junaid is saying is that if you want to be there, don't interact with people. Go for a corner. If you want to interact with people, come back the way the Prophet didn't say that. I mean, he was within 2 doors distance, al-Hussein, and he came back. I think in my talk, in my notes, I said we'll talk about Ayn al-Qadar this time, but I don't think